Good morning. So I'm currently reading. Fuck, that's not the book. We're doing great this morning. I'm currently reading They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. I thought I would vlog the experience because an experience it will be, I have a feeling. So I just finished part one yesterday. And I almost wanted to DNF it like 25 pages in. And I know that's like crazy, and that's why I didn't DNF it, because I was like, Adam, like you literally just sat down to read it. You can't DNF a book 25 pages in. Like that's absolutely fucking absurd. So I finished part one, and like I have a lot of thoughts, and I wrote them all down. So that's what we're gonna talk about. This is where these come in. So the first thing that I wrote down is that it sounds more like Mateo is acting out how he thinks someone would act or react to being told that they were gonna die. I think that's just a side effect of the writing style, which I really don't like. Like, I really don't like the voice or the way that it's written just really bothers me. Like, it's so grating to read. I wrote people are dicks for no reason. Oh, okay. The way that people act towards Deckers does not make sense to me. We have people that are dying in real life, and people do treat them differently, but it's not in the same way because it makes them confront their mortality and it just makes them uncomfortable. I think that would have been a more appropriate commentary to make if you're gonna have people treat Deckers like weird. I think that would have been like a much more appropriate thought-provoking way of doing it instead of it just being like a, oh, people try to take the moral high ground and hang out with Deckers, but they don't understand. But yeah, I'm so far really not into this book, and I thought that I would be, and I don't know why, because I kind of am setting myself up for failure a little bit with this book, because I know I don't really like fiction that much, and if I do read fiction, it's adult fiction because I don't really like YA. This is a great book for me. I just want to read you some of these quotes that I have tabbed just to illustrate my point. When they're talking on the Last Friend app and Rufus is like, you gotta go for it, and Mateo's like, go for it. That's what I said in my profile. Because you definitely don't remember. He's paid more attention than the others and cared about me the way a friend should. Like, yeah, like that's the whole point. I thought that was the whole point of having all of the other people be shitty, was so that when Rufus wasn't shitty, we'd be like, wow, Rufus isn't shitty. Like, you don't have to tell us. It's so, like, on the nose all the time. But I'm gonna read part two now. We'll see what I think of it then. Okay, so I just finished part two. Yeah, I am not liking this book. I feel like there's even aspects of the story that I'd be able to appreciate more if the writing just wasn't so the way it is. Like, the atmosphere or the feeling in this book is something that I just don't vibe with. Like, I really am not into the writing style or the flavor of storytelling that's happening here. It's just... Okay, there's an event happening like across the street from me right now, and I don't think I'm gonna be able to wait until it's over, so we're just gonna have to deal with that. But anyway, there was one thing that I wanted to point out where they talk about biodegradable urns and ashes being used to give a tree life, and that's not true. I don't know. I don't know what else to say. I'll see you Monday, or whenever I finish part 3. So I was just sick for like 4 days, so I probably still sound like it, but I just finished part 3 of They Both Die at the End, and this book is just trying me. I feel like part 3 was maybe less of an issue with like there weren't any lines in particular that like when I read them just made me like roll my eyes or like laugh out loud like there were in the first 2 parts. And what else about part 3? The whole like thing with Peck where he's like gonna fucking take out Rufus. that I can't take seriously. It's just so over dramatic, and like, this is something that people fault John Green for a lot, but I feel like this is what I liked about his books, was that there was just a lot of boring shit in them. And I really like boring shit. Like, I appreciate that in books. I think mundanity is like, mwah. And so the fact that there's just none of that in this is just like, go all the time. And I get that it's because they only have 24 hours to live, but like, I don't know. I don't like this book. And I'm not saying that it's a bad book, I'm just saying it's not a good book for me, for like reasons that I've definitely already said. Like, I don't like reading about teenagers. I just don't. There's nothing against teenagers, unless it's like a very sophisticated kind of teenager. And like, everyone always criticized the way that John Green, I know I keep bringing up John Green, but like, I don't read a lot of YA, and the YA that I did read was John Green, so that's like my reference level. So like, I never understood why people like critique John Green for the way that he writes teenagers, because they're all like, they're too smart or whatever, or like, they think too philosophically. I always appreciated that in John Green's characters, because I don't like the way teenagers are written in other books. I don't like, yeah, I think that's all I have to say about part 3. I'll read part 4 tomorrow. Today I'm just gonna fucking drink tea and sleep. It's a dead man's party. Okay, so I just finished They Both Die at the End. And first thing I want to say is, I have no way of proving it, but I totally called Mateo dying in a fire. Like, at a certain point in the book, I was just like, we're gonna go back to Mateo's apartment, and there's just gonna be a house fire. I guess it was a twist that, like, Rufus did not die in the fire, but I feel like a lot of what people say about this book kind of gave me the wrong impression of it. A lot of people talk about this book like it's really something profound, and I just didn't get that from it at all. Like, it was fun, it was cute, and maybe those aren't words you would use to describe it, but I use them very loosely. Like, it's fun and it's cute and it's kind of light. I think I underestimated what the death cast was going to be in this story, and like, I don't want to even fucking try to judge any kind of intent that Adam Silvera was getting at here. But what he did was he built an entirely new death culture and tried to write a book about it, and I can't tell if there was really any prior knowledge to just current death culture, Western death culture, because in a world with the death cast, there would have to be such an awareness of what death culture was before the death cast happened, and there's just no talk of it except in very surface level kind of ways. I don't know, just the prospect of a book that talks about death, and specifically a culture surrounding death. Like, Deathcast created a whole new culture around death, and I thought that the book might be a little bit more informed than it is. I'm gonna dwell on this a little bit more, and then maybe I'll come back for more final thoughts. Okay, so final thoughts. It's been, I think, a week since I read the book, so I've had time to kind of think about it and think about the things that I said about it. Before I get into anything that's kind of beyond the actual content of the book, I just want to, I guess, wrap up what I actually thought of the actual content of the book. I mean, I wasn't crazy about it, and you definitely saw that. Like, the whole world just feels like it's written the way that teenagers think the world would work. Like, it feels kind of naive. And I feel like the reason that I got so hung up on the world was because even, like, the characters just weren't developed well at all. I don't feel like if Adam Silvera didn't change the way that they spoke in their, respective chapters, there wouldn't be a difference between them. Like, the only difference was that, Adam Silvera changed the way that they spoke on a very surface level. And I feel like surface level is kind of my running theme as far as thoughts about this book goes. I guess I was just expecting more from it, even though it's a YA novel. But then at the same time, it's like, I don't know, like, should we just write off YA? Should we say that, like, teenagers' books just don't require the same depth as adult fiction. But then is that the difference between adult fiction and YA? Because I was under the impression that like the major difference was just the fact that it was about teenagers and not necessarily that the novels were also like less informed or less I don't know. I'm really just trying to think of like a better way to say dumbed down. Because that's what it feels like. It's not really saying anything. It's like the whole point of the book was to just be sad, and like it felt like they only fell in love so that it would be more tragic when one of them dies before the other. Those are kind of my thoughts on just the actual content. But now I kind of want to just talk a little bit about a larger discussion that I feel like this book kind of opens up, sort of. Because I mentioned that what Adam Silvera did was he created an entirely new death culture and then tried to write a book about it without, I think, even realizing that's what he did. So death culture is just like how we as a society, as a culture, collectively deal with the concept of death, or just how we deal with death. And right now, and for a long time, we've been a culture of death denial, meaning like we don't like to talk about it. It's a taboo thing to even bring up. Even like the obsession with anti-aging products is a form of death denial, because it's a denial of getting older, it's a denial of mortality. And so when you have that prior knowledge going into this, and you read about this world where people get calls that they're going to die every single day, I don't know, I wonder, like, what is that death culture? Is it still a culture of death denial? Like, is that even possible in a world with the death cast? Because it's somehow still possible in a world where people die every day anyway, but since the death cast was so incorporated into society, that's what I wasn't expecting. Because I said, I think at one point, like, I underestimated what the death cast was going to be in the story, and I just really wasn't expecting it to be like a societal like norm. And I don't know how it couldn't be, I guess, if it was something that people trusted and accepted as fact, that when you get these calls you're going to die in the next 24 hours. So can you still not talk about death in a world like that? Can the culture still be like so afraid to talk about death? And that's part of the reason why I mentioned this, I think, after the first part, where, you know, people treat people who are dying differently because of that stigma around death and because you don't want to talk about it. So when you're confronted with someone that's dying, a lot of times people don't want to be around them. Even if it's a loved one, it still just makes you so uncomfortable because it's this confrontation of mortality. The same could be said, like, people don't like being around old people. And so that's why it didn't make sense to me that people would treat Deckers weird in the way that they do, where they like want to hang out with them to seem like they're like being so nice. It's just a weird way of doing it. And I guess this goes back to it being a YA novel, where it's like, well, it's just for teenagers. It doesn't have to have that kind of depth or that kind of commentary. But also, like, why shouldn't it? Like, it wouldn't hurt for that to be a message in there if you just replace the way that Deckers are treated in the book with the way that, you know, dying people are treated in real life. I feel like that would have been just thought-provoking and insightful and useful to be there, especially for teenagers, because if you normalize talking about this kind of stuff when they're young, who the fuck am I? When people are young, it becomes less of a stigmatized thing when you're older, because so much of the tragedy of the way that our culture deals with death is that finally when someone dies, there's, you know, this panic of like, what do we do? And then funeral directors, not all funeral directors, but a lot of funeral homes take advantage of that. And because people don't realize that there's options, because they don't want to think about death, they don't want to look into death when they're still alive, or they don't want to think about death until they absolutely have to, they don't realize that you don't have to spend $10,000 on a funeral. They don't realize that you don't have to be embalmed. They don't realize that, like, you don't need a steel casket. You know, they don't realize that cremation is terrible for the environment. And so that's, like, what I'm getting at here is just that those are the benefits of talking about death in a realistic and truthful way. And I'm not, like, faulting Adam Silvera for not, like, preaching about, like, green burial and death positivity in a book, because I don't know that he even knows what any of that is, you know? Like, I'm not saying that, like, oh, he should have. This is kind of the discussion that came to mind as I was reading this book, was like, this is a book about a death culture that doesn't know it's about death culture. So I think like as I was reading it and kind of trying to look past the teenagery writing, I was hoping that there would be some kind of commentary, I guess. Even though I get that the story was supposed to be more about the human side and their experience, I didn't buy that part either. So like if I'm not attached to the characters and I don't feel like what they're saying means anything, then like my focus will go to the world and be like, well, what does the world have to offer? And it didn't feel like the world really said anything either. So yeah, that's just what came to mind as I was reading this and as I was thinking more about it. There's a saying that I've read somewhere, and I forget where I read it, but it's, the more that you dance with death, the less power that it holds over you. And it's really true. The more time you spend with anything, the less power it holds over you. So talking about death and learning about death, and most importantly, learning about death and like the funeral industry and what really happens, you know, when you get cremated, when you get embalmed. Like, what are you putting into the ground, and what are we exposing other human beings to, you know? Like, there's cemeteries here from the Civil War when they started embalming for the first time, because we didn't embalm until the Civil War, and they used arsenic, and there's arsenic in the soil because of that. And you know, now we use formaldehyde, which is a carcinogen, and sure, we don't get it exposed to the soil so much directly anymore, but that's because we put the bodies in a casket, and then we put that casket inside of a concrete vault. And like the myth there is that, you know, it'll keep the body preserved or whatever, but why? Like, why would you want to do that? Like, why not just let the body decompose? It's like we still impose all of the materialistic tendencies of the living onto the dead, and it's all because we don't know anything about death. I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm really rambling, but I think my main point here is that there is a discussion about death culture to be had around this book. And this is why I always say, like, even if I don't like a book, I've never regretted reading a book, because even if I don't like it, it usually makes me think. And this book, like, really opens up a conversation about death culture, and I think that's really important for teenagers and younger people, that we normalize talking about death, but not in a glorifying kind of, like, weird, like, fetishizing it kind of way, but just in an awareness way. It's death awareness. Anyway, that's my spiel. Those are my final thoughts, and I think Adam Silvera is definitely on the right track with writing books about death for teenagers, but they could stand to be a little bit more informed. Informed books about death for teenagers is definitely a genre that should exist. So let me know your thoughts, what you think. If I'm just going way in too deep, I really want to stress that, like, I am just kind of talking now about a larger discussion surrounding the book, not necessarily the actual content of the book. So, I hope this was fun to watch. I had a lot of fun editing this, actually, and I hope, I don't know, maybe you learned something, and I hope you have a good day, and I'll see you next week.